Hello and welcome to Creating Variables, a continuation of the wonderful variables journey that we are on together. Here is my face, I'm still here. This is not a disembodied voice, this is me. Hi. So what we're going to do today is just continue on talking about what it is that variables are and do. And really importantly, we're going to talk about making our own variables. So I'm going to jump back over to Atom, where I'm writing code at the moment. I'm going to just delete the stuff in Draw for now. And I'm going to go back to my default canvas size, so just 500 by 500. I just find that satisfying. So let's imagine that I'm writing a program. So I'm going to set the background to a number. That number is 0. And then I'm going to draw an ellipse at 250, 250. And it's going to be, what, 400 by 400. And then I'm going to draw another ellipse at the same location. And that one's going to be, let's say, 300 by 300. And then another one. And that one's going to be this size. And one more, just because I can, that size. OK. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is to point out that numbers are kind of terrible. In the absence of commenting, which can obviously solve a lot of problems because it inserts some language into your program that will let you kind of know what's happening, whether or not you understand the code itself. Numbers are not very helpful to look at, right? We're not, most humans don't naturally think in terms of little comma-separated lists of numbers. You do get better and better at it as you do more programming, but it's not a natural thing. And so the big problem with a program like this is it's pretty difficult, unless you're experienced, to just look at this and know what this program is actually going to do. So if we do actually go and look at this program, which is over here, we can see that it draws kind of a bullseye thing, right? It's got a series of circles of diminishing sizes, one drawn inside the next. So it looks nice. Could be an artwork that we could sell on Etsy or something like that if we wanted to, but we won't. So this program is hard to read. I could insert a comment in here, but it would be way better if our programs were easier to read just in terms of the code themselves. The other thing that is obviously problematic is if I want to do anything with my cool target bullseye thing, like if I want to move it or change its size, it's going to be a little bit painful to change all of the numbers. And if I want them to change while the program is running, this just won't work at all. These numbers, because they're called hard-coded numbers, so they're written directly into my program, once the program is running, these numbers cannot change. And so my program cannot change. Now, given what we're talking about, and given what we saw with P5's built-in variables like mouse X and mouse Y, you probably can guess that the solution to this problem is using variables, right? So the great thing about variables is that we don't only have to rely on the built-in variables that our programming environment provides. We can make our own for any purposes that we please. So we can create variables, and it's basically a three-step process. To create a variable, the first thing we have to do is tell JavaScript, which is our programming language. We have to tell JavaScript to make a variable actually exist. And we call that declaring a variable. We're declaring that we want this thing to exist in our program. The next thing we have to do is give a value to that variable. We have to store something inside of it. Just like mouse X has the mouse's X position, we need to say what's going to go into our own variables. And putting things into variables is called assignment. That's the official name. We assign things to variables. And then the third thing that we have to do is actually use the variable in our program so that it has some effect, right? So we declare variables to make them exist, to give them a name. We assign to them to put something inside them, generally speaking, a number for us. And we use them somewhere in our program to let them have an effect. So that's the process. Let's look at an example of that. So let's go back to just one circle here. And I guess that's fine. I'll make it a bit smaller. I'm just going to trying to match the lecture notes a little bit here. So let's imagine we've got this program. We've got a circle in the center of the screen, and it's 100 by 100. So I'm going to go look at that quickly. So there it is, doing its thing, being a circle that is 100 pixels in diameter. Good, so that worked. My program works, but this program is still, it's not so easy to read. If you don't know P5, for instance, you might not even know what these numbers mean. So maybe it would be a good idea to at least have a variable that will contain the size of my circle, so that instead of writing 100 here, I'm going to have a variable name. So to do that, we have to go through those steps, right? And step one is to declare a variable. And this is the way that we declare a variable. We write the word let. That is the special magical JavaScript word that tells JavaScript I am going to create a variable. Now I'm declaring that this variable is going to exist. Let, like let there be light in the Bible. And then we write the name of our variable, circle size. So the variable is going to contain the size of my circle, so I call it circle size. There is a lot of leeway in terms of how you name your variables, but I'll talk about some of the rules a little bit later in this video. For now, just notice how it starts with a lowercase c, and when I have a new word, I have an uppercase S, and most importantly, the name that I've written here describes what the variable is for. And I always end instructions with a semicolon, so I do a semicolon there. The other thing to notice here is that I'm declaring my variable up here at the top of my program before my setup function and my draw function. So it's outside the functions. It's not inside the curly brackets of setup, and it's not inside the curly brackets of draw. It's outside right at the top here. Okay, so let circle size. Now that will make my variable called circle size actually exist. So now it exists in the program. There's a thing called circle size. If I go and look at the program running, obviously the program is no different, right? I haven't actually changed how the program works, but while this program is running, there is now a variable somewhere in the ether of this program called circle size. It doesn't do anything because we haven't done the other two steps, right? Circle size doesn't have a value in it yet, so it's not storing anything, and I'm not using it anywhere in my program. You can see it's not referenced anywhere else. So clearly it's not going to have any influence on the program. Now you can declare variables in more places than just at the top of your program. You can declare them actually anywhere you want. But to begin with, at least, it's less confusing if we just always declare them up here at the top. We'll look at exceptions to that as we go along in the course. Okay, so the next thing that we were supposed to do is put a value inside our variable. So to do that, given that putting a value inside circle size is a bit of a kind of setting up sort of task, one place that we could do that is here in setup. So inside my setup function, I can write circle size, which is the name of the variable. This is how I'm going to put something inside it, is the first thing I write is its name. Then I do a single equals sign. That equals sign is called the assignment operator. It's the thing that lets us put values into variables. And then I'm going to put the value that I want to put into circle size, which is a number, 100. That's just to match the size that I had before. So it's 100. And again, because this is an instruction, this is an assignment instruction, a semicolon to end that line, saving my file. So I've declared that there is going to be something called circle size by saying let circle size. And then I've put something inside that variable by saying circle size is assigned 100. Please remember, or start trying to remember, that a single equal sign like this does not mean that it should check whether these things are equal. It puts this value into this variable. Okay? So now circle size has the number 100 in it. So this is a good place in setup to set up my circle size, right? So now when I run the program, if I go back, again, it still looks the same. And the reason for that this time is that there's still a variable called circle size. Now that variable has the number 100 in it, but I'm not using that variable to do anything, right? So it's still, the program itself remains the same. One thing to note about assignment is that you can do it, if you want to, at the same time as declaring a variable. So rather than doing these in two steps, let circle size to declare, circle size is assigned 100 to assign a value, I could instead say let circle size and then is assigned 100. So then that whole thing is being done in one place. So after this line, we have a variable called circle size, and it has the value 100 in it. It's up to you. You're very welcome to also assign your values in setup if you want to. This is a very, very common thing that you'll see, and I'll be doing a lot of this. So feel free to get used to this as well. So we've got the same thing now. We've got a variable called circle size with 100 in it, and the final thing that we needed to do was to use the variable, right? And we know that the size of our ellipse is this third argument here, the 100. So instead of the 100, just like when I used mouse X and mouse Y or width, etc., I can write circle size like that. And now my ellipse is using two hard-coded numbers to put it in the center of the canvas, and then it is using circle size, the variable, as its width. We know that circle size has 100 in it, right? So if I go back, the program looks the same. This time the program looks the same because the variable is working, but it has the same number in it. If I were to change circle size by going back here and saying, actually, I want my circle size to be 200, and then I save and go back again, now my circle is 200 in diameter. This is part of the beauty of variables, right? So I changed what is inside circle size, and my program changed because I use that variable down here, and now that variable has 200 in it when I use it. And this program, as you can see, has already become that little bit more readable, right? For someone who doesn't know any programming, they could now at least read this and see, oh, well, there's an ellipse, and it's got a size, and I can see up here that its size is equal to 200. Even if you don't program, you could start to piece these things together. So that's part of the big advantage of variables, is readability. Now, that's how we create variables. That is literally the whole thing. It's not more complicated than that. We write let, name of variable, assignment, and then the value to go inside. And that's it for the rest of programming for all eternity. That's how it works. It is not any more complicated than that. We use variables by writing their name where we want to use their value, right? So I want to use the 200 that's inside circle size, so I write circle size here. If I change what's inside circle size, what gets used here changes as well. They're variables, they can change. Now the dream scenario in programming, generally speaking, is that we want to use variables for absolutely everything. That means that if we look at our program and we see numbers, we should generally be suspicious, and we should want to change them into variables. So that means that we've got a few places that we could make changes. So going from the top, the first thing we see is actually these two numbers in Create Canvas, right? The width and the height. This is the one instance in P5 programs where it doesn't really make sense to use variables here. We could, if we want to, define some variables at the top that will be our canvas width and canvas height, but it really doesn't seem like it's super necessary. This is the one instruction where we'll just leave our hard-coded numbers in because it's right at the top of the program anyway. However, we get to here and we see that the background is a number. So we should make a variable for that. I'm going to declare it above circle size, let, to declare the variable. The variable's name, which I'm going to write as background shade. Could call it BG shade if I wanted to. BG shade would also be completely fair. I'm going to write it out fully. I don't actually mind long variable names. I think that they make programming more readable a lot of the time. The assignment operator, which is a single equal sign, because I'm going to put in my value, and then the value, I'm going to keep it the same as the background down here, so just 0 and a semicolon. And because I now have a variable for defining the background shade, I am going to change this to my variable name, background shade. You can also see how Atom is auto-completing as I go, right? So when I started typing background, it recognized that I've been using something called background as a function, and it noticed that I had a thing called background shade, which is a variable. I selected this with my arrow keys, and if I hit return, it will fill it out for me. That can speed programming up quite a bit. Okay, so now I've got a background shade variable. I'm using it in background, and then I know that my ellipse here has got two numbers, 250 and 250, that controls its position. So I'm also going to add variables for its x and y position. So I'll continue with my naming convention, circle, and then x, and that is 250. So let, to say I'm going to make a new variable, circle x is the name of the variable, the equal sign is the assignment operator to assign a value, and 250 is the value that I am putting inside circle x. and then let circle y, same thing, is 250. Okay, so now we've got 4 variables. I need to update my ellipse to use the variables, so circle x and circle y. It's a lot like mouse x and mouse y, except that I'm just defining the values that are going to be in there, 250 and 250. So now my program in the draw loop is all made out of variables, and it's even more readable, right? Now we know that the thing that we were giving to background was the shade that I wanted the background to be, and we know that the things I was giving as arguments to the ellipse were its x, its y, and its size, and that's much, much more apparent because I've named those things as variables. Now, of course, the program works in exactly the same way. If I switch back over, I've kept all of the same values in those variables, so we don't see a difference. This is a difference right now that mostly exists at the level of the code, right? It's more readable, and as we'll see in another video, it becomes much more interesting to work with. So the other thing that I need to talk about here is how do you name your variables? And we'll have a style guide on the website so that we know that what the rules are. You can always check if you want to, but they're not super complicated. There are a few rules though. So the most important rule is that a variable name should describe what it's for, right? It should be self-explanatory. So circle x is a good name for this variable because it contains the x coordinate of my circle. So that's good. But if I were to call it Jigglypuff, like that, not a good variable name. It does not tell me what is going to be in the variable. Jigglypuff is not inside this variable, it's just a number. It would still work, like I could use Jigglypuff here instead of circle x. So now the ellipse is being drawn at Jigglypuff, circle y, circle size. And that will still work, that's still the same program, right? If I go back over, no problem. But now the Jigglypuff variable is kind of useless. I don't really like it because it doesn't tell me anything about what's meant to be in there. So circle x is a good name, Jigglypuff, not so good. You can't have spaces in variable names, so I can't do that, for example, much as I might want to, because it might make it a bit more readable for me. Variable names have to be all one word, all contiguous letters. So we can't have that space. That will actually break my program. You can even see here that the x is a funny color now, because JavaScript is getting confused. So no spaces. They have to be unique. I can't name any variable I can't name any variable the same thing as another variable. So I can't say mouse x, for example, here. Mouse x is already taken. We know that it's already taken by p5. So calling in my variable mouse x will collide or create a conflict with that other variable, and that's a bad thing. Likewise, I can't call 2 variables the same thing in my own program. So I can't say, here's a variable called background shade, and here's another variable called background shade. That seems super obvious here, but as you have bigger programs, you might end up being tempted to call 2 different variables the same thing, and it can, it won't work. It's fairly obvious why it doesn't work, but it still does happen. So circle x is better than that. For the similar reasons, you can't call your variables things that are used by JavaScript. So you can't call them let, for example, and you can't call them function. Any of these special words that we'll build up our knowledge of over time, like function, let, etc., you can't use those as variable names because they're already spoken for. They're already being used by JavaScript. Variable names, generally speaking, all that they can contain is letters, as you can see here, lower and uppercase, and numbers. So I can also add numbers to these as well. I don't really need to do that right now. You can't have weird symbols and stuff. So like I can't put forward slashes, for example, here to make it look awesome and dynamic, because again, this will super duper confuse JavaScript. So no weird symbols in your variable names. Numbers are acceptable. It's even best maybe to avoid numbers a little bit if you can. And then secretly, or not so secretly, because I'm telling you, JavaScript can also allow you to have $signs in your variable names, which is just $, and underscores in your variable names, which is the key under your dash key. Again, unless you have a really good reason for using underscores and $signs, I would say just stick with letters. It's 99% of the time it's what you need. You can use numbers, but you cannot start variables with numbers. So you can see that this is being confusing in Atom. So we see that the 12 is a funny color. You can't start a variable with a number, but you can put numbers elsewhere. Again, generally just avoid numbers in your variables if possible. It'll come up, but it's not super useful. And variable names are case sensitive. So circle X is different from circle X, like this. Those are two different variables. JavaScript will see these as completely separate things because that X is uppercase here and lowercase here. Just something to remember, that it is case sensitive. Okay. And as I said before, the style of variable naming that we use in this course is called camel case. What that means is that it starts with a lowercase letter for the first word, so background is the first word, lowercase b, and then every subsequent word that might be in your variable name, like shade, starts with a capital letter. So background, shade. If I wanted more, I could say like in gray or something like that. If I wanted to be very specific, again, making sure to capitalize each subsequent word. Okay, that's camel case. Those are all of the conventions and rules that apply to variable names. It's just something that we'll learn, and as I said, we'll have a style guide in order to nail that down. Okay, one final thing I want to talk about, and then we'll be finished with this basic idea of declaring and then using variables. And that is the very common issue that we can run into, which is that we forget to put something into a variable. So currently we've got our program and it works. If I go back over, draws a circle. Wonderful. If I were to forget to put a number, an important number, into one of my variables, say I forget to put a number into circle size, I just remove the assignment and then the value that I put inside it. Now there's nothing in circle size, right? So when it comes down to the draw function, which it's doing over and over again, and it's trying to draw its ellipse, it draws it at circle x, circle y, which is 250, 250, but then it tries to use circle size to define the size of the ellipse, and there's nothing in there. So it's a question, right? What would be there if there's nothing there? And a very reasonable answer to that is that you might think it would be something like 0. In fact, what is in there is this special value called undefined. It's as if we wrote this, undefined. This is the special value that's in a variable by default if you don't put anything in there. And the most important thing to know about undefined is it causes trouble. It's not something that you want in your variables unless you know what you're doing. The reason for that is when I declare circle size with nothing and it has undefined in it, it uses undefined in my ellipse drawing. That means it has an undefined size. And if we go look at the program, that means we don't see a circle because you can't draw something with an undefined size. So really the current lesson that we need to learn from that is simply that you should always have values in your variables. Not putting values in your variables is something that you can do on purpose, and that's fine, but be aware that if you don't put something into a variable and you try and use it, it will probably cause trouble. So that's just the big thing to remember, okay? All right, so we've now seen how to declare our variables and use our variables. And declare, assign to, and use our variables. And that's it for this video. Those are the key things that we need to know about in order to use variables literally for the rest of programming. It's not more complicated than let, variable name, and then if we want to put something in, we say variable name, assignment operator, which is the equals sign. Get used to that, please. And then the value that we want to put in, like 250 or 0 or something like that. Then we have a variable with a value in it, and then whenever we want to use that variable, we just write the variable name where we would have written a number. Ellipse at circle x, circle y, circle size. That's variables. That's how variables work. I'm aware that I should go and commit this actually in my GitHub desktop, so let me do that quickly before we finish this video. So I've made a bunch of changes. Let me just say learned about declaring variables with an exclamation mark because of course I'm very excited. Learned about declaring variables. That's what I changed here in this program. I commit. And I'll just continue not to push for now because I'm still working. Okay, perfect. So that is it for this video. I will get busy making the next video. And hopefully you now understand this idea of how to create variables, put things in them, and use them in your code. Okay? See you in the next one.